And so we are all here tonight to learn how to boost our stories with editing, music, and sound clips. Our featured speaker is Alex Bowden, former news director and general manager of 88.3 FM WQRI Radio in Bristol, Rhode Island, where he hosted a weekly talk show called the Bowden Breakdown. He is currently the podcast producer for local author and former head of health for the state of Rhode Island, Dr. Michael Fine's Alternative Fictions podcast. Alex is a 2020 graduate of Roger Williams University, having earned degrees in theater and communications and media studies. He is working on an upcoming episode for our library podcast, WQRI Radio, that will air on August 24th. It is about Jane, a shuttle driver at the school who is living her dream, interacting with students, and having the time of her life, transporting them around campus. But when the world changes overnight in mid-March 2020, she is forced onto unemployment and yearns for the time when she can be back at work doing what she loves. If you are a fan of stand-up comedy, you might just see Alex performing his routine around Rhode Island and Massachusetts, or you can find him on Twitch. We're pleased to have you here tonight, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. That introduction makes me sound a lot cooler than I am, and I love it. All right, so let's get down to business. By the way, I love reading the chat, so if you want to put messages in there, I'll take a look at them. It's fine and all right with me. So like you heard, today's training episode is about boosting your stories with editing, music, and sound clips. So we're going to start off with the basics. I'll try to be brief on each one. I tend to be a little long-winded, so let's see how this goes. So first, I want to talk about editing software. Before you even want to get started thinking about a podcast or thinking about how you want to integrate sound clips and different information into your podcast, you want to make sure that you are super familiar with editing. And I'll go more into editing as far as the actual action of doing it, because it seems like a daunting task, but once you get used to it, it's really, it can be super easy. It can be a walk in the park. It does take a lot of time. It can be tedious at some points, but when you get right down to it and you learn how to do it effectively, it's a really important tool, and it can create a lot of opportunities for your storytelling. So first, I want to go over the editing software. Obviously, there are a couple of choices, some of which are obvious choices and some of which are choices that you might want to make if you're depending on how professional you want to go. So the first audio editing software is pretty much like the basic audio editing software you should be using. There's some that come with Windows. There's some that come with Mac. I'll talk about GarageBand, which comes with Mac. But overall, the big one is Audacity. And the big selling point of Audacity isn't even a selling point. It's that it's free. I'll talk more about Audacity later on, but that is pretty much your number one software you're going to be using. If you are a Mac user, your number one software will most likely be GarageBand. In fact, GarageBand will probably come preloaded onto your Mac, whether you have like a desktop Mac or a Mac laptop. GarageBand will be there, and that will be on there for free. I'm pretty sure if you want the next level of GarageBand, which is Logic Pro, it's going to cost you around $200. I'd say go for it if you want to take advantage of some of the different aspects that they add into it, like they give you extra looped audio clips, sorts of things like that. You'll be fine with a free version, but the $200 version is open if you're interested. And then there's Vegas Pro. Vegas Pro is like if you're recording the next big hit album, It's used a lot in music. You can use it for podcasts. I've used it for podcasts, like when I'm occasionally in a newsroom and I get to have fun and like fool around with a program like that. Can cost you anywhere between $200 and $800. That's depending if you get the suite. So if you get like the Vegas suite, you can do video editing as well. Yeah, don't go for it unless you are like, unless your podcast is huge, or if you're already working for NPR or whatever, institution you're going with is going to be paying for that. Other than that, Vegas Pro, it's really interesting to use. I don't know if it has the best user experience, but then again, your top two are going to be Audacity if you're on any computer, and GarageBand if you're on Mac, Apple computers. Uh, if you ran out of options, if you don't know how to use any of it and you don't feel like using any of it, there's always iMovie. iMovie is good if you're working with video, but don't do this unless you are working with video or you've exhausted all options and you don't feel like learning Audacity. iMovie, it's super finicky with audio. You should only be using it with video, but the option is there should you need to. So let's move on to Audacity a little bit further in. Again, the big selling point of Audacity is that it's free. The user interface isn't the best, but it's enough to get the job done. The more you become familiar with it, the easier it is to use. You're going to want to familiarize yourself with a lot of the sound wave patterns. So as you're recording, like most audio software, when you record, it shows you audio waves. And I feel as if the audio waves in Audacity are not as, they're not pictured as intuitively as, say, GarageBand would be. For those of you that are more familiar with editing, you might be agreeing with that. You might disagree. That's just how I feel. As you'll find that when you're editing, you'll zoom into your audio track on Audacity and the lines will be a lot thinner and you might not realize where you might have been speaking. The reason why I'm talking about sound wave patterns in general is that as you're talking, you have obviously different timbres to your voice. Your voice might get increase in volume or it might decrease, and you might want to be cognizant of, where you're talking and how you're hearing it, if that makes sense. It's tough to explain conceptually, but say you're saying, I saw a dog walk in the park, and the way you say park, it pops in your lips and it'll appear on the audio track. You want to make sure that you recognize where the P's are and the pops are, if that makes sense. I'll go into that more if you have any questions later on. As long as you're familiar with the record button and the pause button, you will succeed. I say that universally among all of the audio softwares. Record is the red dot, pause or stop is the square. As long as you know those two, you're going to be okay. You can start to figure things out. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so this one is about GarageBand. GarageBand, like I said, is, as most Apple products go, they're very user-friendly. For all my iPhone owners out there, you know how that feels. It's super easy to use an iPhone. It's super easy to use GarageBand if you want to do audio editing. I didn't find the best picture for this. It kind of digitized a little bit, but as you can see, it sort of shows you the layout of the top bar. For GarageBand, you see obviously your record circle, which is red, and then your stop button, which is the black square. I feel like in GarageBand, more so than in Audacity, you have an easier ability to do more advanced levels of recording. You can obviously do separate tracks in Audacity, but again, it's a little tougher to like figure out. With GarageBand, it's super easy. You create 2 tracks and you can track it through different mics. So you're doing a conversation with multiple people. I'll show you on my end. So this is an AT2035 microphone. So this would be my microphone. And say if I was doing a conversation with someone else, they would be using this microphone, and we'd be sending the tracks um, through different tracks. Basically, we'd be sending the audio through different tracks. And GarageBand, it's super easy to figure out how to do that. And like I said, GarageBand comes with looped audio, royalty-free stuff. If you're familiar with if you watch a lot of YouTube, or sometimes you'll see it on TV shows, if you hear like a ringtone or if you hear a certain noise, it often comes from the little library that they give you of different sounds on GarageBand. I don't recommend it for podcasts. Like if you're trying to, say if you're recording a story and you're talking about something interesting and you just have some sort of stinger looping over and over again, I don't know if I would recommend that specifically, but if there's like a little section, you need a little music there, I'd, slide it right in. And like I said earlier, if you get the upgraded version, which is the Logic Pro, then you'll get more of an audio library. So let's move on to the next slide. So familiarizing yourself with editing. Obviously, I don't have enough time to teach you guys the ins and outs of editing. Editing seems, like I said before, a really daunting task. It seems like a really daunting task. You have a lot of buttons, you got a lot of lines, lots of arrows pointing in all sorts of different directions, and it seems like you can't make anything out of anything when you're using it. Here is what I recommend. Editing is something that you're able to teach. If you can take lessons on it, there's people that do seminars on how to do it. Here's what I feel about it personally, and you can take it with a grain of salt. I feel like when you are trying to learn how to edit, it's a lot more effective when you just play around with the software. Just play around with it. I gave an instance on the slide. I said, record yourself saying a mix of letters, and then you can learn how to cut and paste portions of the audio and make it seem like you're saying the alphabet in order. So if I'm saying Z, X, Y, W, V, U, T, if I cut it in a certain way or flip it, I can say V, U, T, however the alphabet goes. I don't know why I am forgetting how to do it right now. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? But if you say it in a different way, you can learn with the audio editing software how to put it in the right order. And then obviously you have universal commands. Like I said before, red circle is record, the square is stop. This is a huge thing for most audio editing software. If you right click, and it depends when you right click, I should have made it a little clearer. You'll have like a line that goes through your audio tracks. You'll have a line that goes through as it plays. And when you pause it, the line will stop. If you right click wherever that line is, you can select on most audio editing software to split the audio. And then you can make it go forward a little bit more, and you can split another piece of audio, and you can split one clip, and you can put it into different sections. A lot of you who are here might know this because you're interested in podcasting anyway, so you might have a little experience. I feel like it's important for me to say it for anyone who's not familiar with it, just because these are the editing basics, and it's how you're going to succeed when you try to make your own podcast or you're trying to tell a story. So podcast brainstorming. Here's a couple of podcasts I threw up there. You want to know, before you're telling a story, you want to know what genre you're going for. Are you doing a comedy? Are you doing a drama, like an audio drama, sort of like War of the Worlds type of situation where you're telling an interesting story that has dramatic elements to it, maybe tragic elements? Are you doing a news report? Are you reporting on an issue that's occurring in the world? Are you interviewing someone, or are you having a conversation with someone? I put interview and conversation on different bullet points because those are, I feel like in podcasting, different designations. I feel like an interview is very direct. You have a set of questions you've planned for. A conversation is, you've planned it a little bit. You've sort of got what's happening or what you want to talk about generally. But other than that, you're kind of just shooting the breeze with someone. And so here are a couple of podcasts I put on here. So you obviously have This American Life. This American Life is like the standard NPR, um, industry standard, really, NPR podcast. If you want to learn how to tell stories like them, these are like the premier storytellers, and they do sort of reports, sort of audio dramas, and sort of interviews, and they mix a little. They have learned sort of how to mix multiple genres and stick it into one podcast, and it's kind of cool like that. And Crime Town is similar. Crime Town is a lot more of a report. um, I have a feeling most of you are from Rhode Island. If you haven't listened to Crime Town, I highly recommend it. It's all about Providence, in like the 70s and 80s. So if you're already interested in crime, then you can learn all about the mafia and how that was operating in Providence. It's very cool, and it was the number one podcast at one point, and it's all about Providence. So look at that, Rhode Island, little roadie in the big time. The other things on here are Your Mom's House podcast. That's with Tom Segura. He's a comedian, and he does it with his wife, Christina P. She's a great comic. If you're a fan of comedy, highly recommend it. It is a little vulgar. It is a little obscene. So if you're not a fan of that, don't go for it. But I felt like I should mention them because they are a great podcast for sound clips. They are one of the few podcasts, and they're reminding me a lot of Howard Stern. If anyone's familiar with a lot of old Howard Stern, just putting in sound drops and sound clips from different things and playing videos. And they managed to do it in a really well done, stylized and comedic way, because they have their own personal voice that they use on stage, and they translate that into the podcast medium and are able to do that, for their show. And then there's Joe Rogan. Some people love the show, some people hate the show. Basically, I put it up there because it's the conversation show. It's one of the shows that prove that podcasts don't have to be overproduced. It's really not overproduced. It started as Joe Rogan, who is a comic. You might know him from Fear Factor, or if you watch MMA fights, he's from there. He does the announcing for that, and he has conversations with friends, and that's about it. And it's kind of evolved into he has conversations with big time people all over the place, so politicians and all of that. So that is something that you can be interested in. And he's interesting as far as music and sound clips go because he doesn't really do a lot of it. He focuses a lot on conversation, and it's kind of an instance how you cannot use sound clips and still succeed in doing a podcast. So, wow, the image here did not translate well at all in a presentation, but that's okay because I can sort of give you an instance of what's happening here. But in general, my this slide and the whole lesson in general should reinforce that you should be planning your episodes and planning your podcast. If you're doing one podcast, you want to narrow your story down into one topic. It's a lot like writing an essay for school. For those of you who are just out of school or haven't been to school in forever, if you remember your writing essays, your teacher would say, have a topic in mind, have a thesis. And then sometimes they'd be like, well, don't even mention the topic. You have your thesis, do a thesis statement. For this, for a podcast, it's almost narrative. And I'm saying this just to toot my own horn for the podcast that's coming out on WQRI Radio. But what I did was I just said the topic of my podcast straight out, because if you're implanting a topic into someone's head, they're gonna be like, well, I'm interested. Like, what else is there gonna be said? Or, what's this person's take on XYZ? This American Life does a great job at that. They have Act 1, Act 2, and their Act 1 will be all about, I'll just say sombreros, right? And you're like, what? Sombreros? And then they'll do like a whole interesting podcast on sombreros. It's just a weird thing that works. And you just say it right from the top. Here's my topic. Let's go. I would recommend it. If you're doing a comedic conversation that's going all over the place, you should still have a voice to the podcast. I was saying that with your mom's house. They're comedians anyways, so they know how to operate on stage. And basically, when you want to add sound in, the sound should be complementing your voice. So you don't want to add anything in that might, I guess, like distract from the way you're speaking. If you know, um, it's interesting in comedy because it's become a lot more absurd as we've gone through time. But for those of you who are interested in doing comedy podcasts, you want to make sure your sound clips kind of support what you're talking about and not really like, here, we're going to do comedy. And now here's a really depressing song to end everything off on. It's like, doesn't really fit, you know? For most other podcasts, have a script prepared. If you're doing a report, if you're doing an interview, or if you just followed someone around for the day and you now have this huge bulk of audio, and you need to cut it down to clips and quotes, you you should have a script prepared just so you know that when you get down to the editing software, you know where to put in those clips to make the story sound really cohesive. Um, it's like a puzzle piece, as I put on my slideshow. Um, Big thing is, think of the podcast as a play or television episode. We all watch plays or movies, even. We all watch movies, we all watch TV. Some of us are play goers. Ask yourself what you would want to see on stage or on the screen, and then make it happen, but make it happen with audio. And I know that's a really tough thing to do. You don't have that visual, but we're going to go into that a little further. Um, First big thing is music. Music sets the tone to your story. Music is a huge, huge thing because there are like, I really do think it's the number one way to set the stage for your story, but it's also like the biggest downfall to your podcast almost, because while you have to use music, you can't use certain music because of copyright. It's kind of interesting, but I'm going to try to tell you ways how to get around it. So, like I said, music sets the tone for the story. It transports us into the world of the story. Um, I'll try to think of an example. This American Life does this all the time. This American Life, in fact, has a great report on a story about a 15-year-old kid in Florida. I think he was like 15 or 16, and there was a new girl that came into class, and he liked the girl. This is a true story. He liked the girl in class, and they wanted to he wanted to ask her out to prom or something, or like the big dance, and she said, I'll go to prom with you if you get drugs for me, if you get weed, basically. And he gave her the drugs, and she was like, oh my gosh, thank you, like, let's go to the dance. A week before the dance happened, there was a huge drug bust around the school, and the kid was arrested. And it turned out that the girl that he liked was an undercover police officer. So that's the story. How do we transport ourselves into a high school in Florida in 2011? Find a hit song from 2011. What's like a local Florida artist? You can do that kind of research and find out like what kind of music or what was going on in that time and what can transport you into that story. Um, say you're in an office setting, find a song that plays in offices. I also said the same thing about a car. A nightclub has all the music. When you're outside, what's an ambient outside song you might hear? Car, is the radio on? Say you're recording someone in the car and the radio is playing. Maybe you can, and I did this in one of my podcasts. When I was recording Jane, the shuttle driver, she had the radio on and a song played over the radio. And what I did is I melded in the actual song with the song that was playing on the radio. So it was kind of fuzzy in the recording because it was in the background, but then I brought it out through the editing, and you can do really cool stuff like that. And and what's awesome too is sometimes the song that's playing might even have to do with the subject you're talking about, you know. What played during the podcast that I made was No Children by the Mountain Goats, and they say we'll never come back to this town again, and then at the end it's COVID, right? You don't come back to school. It's just an interesting development there. Don't be afraid to put in obscure songs you like. If you like a song and no one knows it, that's perfect opportunity to throw it in there. They'll love it. You'll love it, and you can introduce people to the songs you like. Here's the only problem you hit when you put in songs you like or songs that you are interested in. There's always copyright. So it depends. If you're working for an educational institute, you can get away with doing songs. I know for WQRI, technically because we were under an education charter, you could play whatever you want and you didn't have to pay the artist personally, right? Other than that, you know, you got to pay out of pocket. And I'm sure if you want to play like, I don't know, a Taylor Swift song, a Taylor Swift song isn't going to be costing $3. You know, it's big stuff, big money, and the punishment is a copyright strike. And you don't want a copyright strike because then your content can be taken down, and etc. You don't want to do it. Here's a couple of options though for you to kind of protect yourself when you're trying to do a podcast. You can find music that you like through Creative Commons. It's online. Creative Commons has a bunch of music. It's tough to find royalty-free music that's good, but trust me, it's out there. You can find it. You'll figure it out. If you like songs that are like remixes, you can ask permission from the person that does the remix. And because they're working under a fair use situation, and then you ask them for permission, it just carries over. Then there's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that's DMCA. That's basically what gives the content creator of the music permission to strike you if you use it. I would recommend, like I said, Creative Commons is great recommendation. As you can see, it's classical music. If you like classical music and you want to put it in there, classical music is a great tool to use. Jessica mentioned that about Twitch earlier in my bio. I love going on Twitch. Someone who goes on Twitch right now is T-Pain. I put in, he has, I believe it's called the Pizzle Pack. And that gives you a whole slew of hip hop type songs done by T-Pain, like an actual artist. And he said, and he puts a disclaimer and he says, all of this music is DMCA free. So if you want to use that music in your podcast and you're looking for that type of feel, absolutely free. Or you know, DMCA free, so you won't get copyright strike. Oh, I should also mention general copyright information. I would be remiss if I didn't say it. For copyright, I believe it is 70 years after the artist's death that their content becomes copyright free. So that even counts for plays too. And if they were working under hire or they have like an agency that's taking over their information, it's like another 120 years. So just be mindful of stuff like that. I know it's a lot, but you can be pretty sure of copyright related incidents when you see them. So try to stay away from them. So let's take a look at sound clips. So you want to make sure the sound clips have relevancy to the episode. I said it earlier with the comedy stuff. If you're making jokes and then you play a depressing song, it's like, what's happening here, you know? Or you play something, you know, if it's for the sake of comedy, then go right ahead. Like if it's purposeful. Other than that, just don't play around with that. The person you're interviewing is oh, okay. So the person, when you're doing an interview and you're doing a report about somebody and you're interviewing them, you might ask a question and they answer it in a certain way that you might not want to put in a certain part of your podcast. But what you can do is you can introduce like a subtopic within your podcast, and you can have the answer to that question that may have had nothing to do with anything as the answer to the question you might have posed maybe a week later when you're editing. Uh, if it, you know, it's pe- people say that there's like ethical considerations to take with that. As long as you're not taking anyone out of context, I feel like it's an appropriate thing to do, especially narratively if you're trying to craft a story. But don't like put someone in a position where you said something and then you frame it so that this person is all of a sudden agreeing. Say you say something horrendous and then this person, you cut in a clip of them saying yes. Like you don't want to do something like that. That's unethical. Not only in journalism but just in media in general. It happens all the time in media. We're probably all familiar with it. Just like, don't do it. It can land you in trouble. And you don't want to be known as the person who, I want to interview for a podcast. Well, I heard that you basically clip chimp. You make it sound like I said something terrible, or you made my friend sound terrible. Keep your sound clips appropriate to your genre. Like I said, a dramatic podcast shouldn't have something funny unless you're trying to create attention in a scene. Say you're lighthearted through the show that you made, and then all of a sudden something cuts, and then something dark happens. You got to make sure that you are kind of building a tension there, where things seem okay, but there's something off, and then you got to hit that off point. For sound effects, say if someone's walking through a door, you want to make you want to do like a door creaking noise. Maybe you don't have to go overboard. There's points where you go overboard and it's like you put a sound effect to everything. At that point you're really making a comedy. But if you're building tension to like our big realization for the character or the person in my story, then that's where you're supposed to hit those sound effects, and then boom, right? If that makes sense. Again, ask questions for the end, and I'll be sure to answer them. Record surrounding audio in the interview and clip it into the podcast. Here's an example with the podcast I'm doing, or that I did, for Jane, the shuttle driver. I just basically I put my microphone next to the bus while the bus was running, so it was like, and I just had the bus running audio, right? And then later on, you can use the bus running audio in your podcast. It's as easy as that. Ambient sounds from around. Say if you're recording in a park, just go to a quiet part of the park, put your mic down, have the mic pick up the birds chirping, kids playing in the distance. There's your ambient audio right there. All you had to do was hit record on your iPhone even, so that's how, and then you can start putting that into your podcast, and it, like, again, that sets the scene as well as music does too. So I'm going to finish it off with this, just a final word. Just 4 steps. You got to learn the editing. You got to plan the episode. You have to record what you want, and then just create the podcast. Here are a couple of small things. Just final words. Experiment with storytelling opportunities. You don't want to tie yourself down to one way of storytelling. Just explore watch movies that kind of subvert expectations, or watch movies that aren't linear. I know, like, I don't want to bring it up because it feels like the obvious non-linear storytelling movie, but obviously Pulp Fiction, where you begin with the end and then you go through, be interesting with your storytelling. As you become more familiar with your editing, you can start to take a lot of liberties with the way you tell the story. So just try to be interesting, and yeah, watch movies that subvert expectations. Like just pique your audience's interest. Make it feel like, especially if you're telling a dramatic story, make it feel like there's no possible way to come back from the, say something bad happens. Make it feel like there's no way to come back from this. And then boom, make it it's like a sports movie. The team's gonna win and the guy gets the girl and all the, everything happens. It's like make it like a classic. Learn to master all the genres. Try being funny, try being serious. um I know I was saying like don't be funny and play a depressing song, but there's ways to do it, you know what I mean? You can try to combine different ends of the genre spectrum and you can surprise people. It's all about kind of surprising people with your ability to tell a story, and you can do that through the way you edit and mix things around. um, Obviously know a through line, have that topic that I was talking about before, know the through line of your story, have a goal in mind. And the goal is a big thing because it can be a goal for your podcast success, how many listeners you want, or it can be a goal for how you want to learn. uh, so your goal can be, I want to figure out how to edit this and that and put together a 5 minute. And then in a month, I want to learn how to do a 10 minute effectively. So just set little steps for yourself. And as you go along to set goals for your podcast. I want my podcast to have 10 listeners. I want my podcast to have 20 listeners by the end of, X year. And finally, my big thing, my big thing is if you have audio on you, and I assume because you're in a podcasting training lesson seminar right now, you either are interested in taking audio from someone or recording something from someone, or you have audio on you. My big thing is do not sit on the audio. Do not do nothing with the audio. What you recorded now might not be relevant in 10 years, right? So you might have interviewed someone and it's not going to matter in 10 years. But if you make it into a compelling story, it might be relevant for 100. I don't know. I feel like I've heard that from somewhere. I wrote it down and it felt very profound. Maybe I did make it up, maybe I didn't, but it feels right because I've sat on audio before and I've wanted to go back to it and it was just too late, So if you've got a story that you want to tell, make that story now, because if you just have a bunch of audio that you don't know what to do with, then it's just a bunch of audio you don't know what to do with. So put together that story, put it together with music, put it together with sound clips, and you will have a successful podcast 100%.